We are now joined by Dallas Alexander, a former Tier 1 Special Forces sniper in the Canadian military, who has protected VIPs, including the Canadian Prime Minister, as a sniper detail. In 2017, Alexander and his four-man sniper team set the world record for the longest confirmed kill in history at over 3.5 kilometers when they took out an ISIS fighter in Iraq. Along with that, Dallas is also a country musician. So there's perhaps no better subject matter expert to walk us through the shocking events that we saw on the weekend at the Trump rally in Pennsylvania than you, Dallas. So thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we get into it, I want to play a short clip for the audience of your social media post yesterday breaking down your reaction to the shooting at the Trump rally.
Just if you don't know me or are new to this page, I spent just about 17 years in the military, just about 14 of which were at Tier 1 Special Operations unit called JTF 2. Our sniper team has the world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill. And a huge part of our job while I was there and while I was a sniper was doing close protection for VIPs up to and including the Prime Minister when he would go to dangerous countries like Iraq or Afghanistan. We would be in charge of that security. So I'm very familiar with the layout of these types of things and what the jobs should be. And yesterday, what happened, I have no doubts in my mind that the shooter had help from somewhere within an agency, an organization, or the government. The second I saw that aerial photo of what they were saying happened, it immediately made no sense to me. You cannot, in broad daylight, get onto a rooftop within, it looked like maybe a couple hundred yards, if that. You can't get into that position with a gun when there's a president speaking. It cannot be done.
So, Dallas, in that clip, you mentioned that you believe the shooter must have had help from inside, some inside help before he was able to take the shot. Explain to us why you feel that way.
So this exact scenario is essentially, it was a big part of my job for a long time. And I got to work at the kind of the top level of it. To me, I immediately, when that aerial, so I was out at a restaurant, I just saw it come up on a TV that was the aerial picture of the rally site. And they started labeling things. And as soon as they said that the shooter was on a rooftop 130 yards from Donald Trump, my immediate thought and reaction was, then he had help to get there. It's just, it's the most obvious place. It should have been the number one priority. It doesn't make any sense. And it would have just took someone sitting. It didn't even have to be a sniper on the roof there. Just someone at the base of the building. So random people couldn't climb on a ladder and get a vantage point over top of Donald Trump. None of it makes any sense. I think that the events after the shots fired, there's a lot of talk about confusion, and one of the snipers had someone in their sights and couldn't get permission to shoot, and all the chaos. Some of that stuff, if you're telling me it's incompetency, I'm like, yeah, I could see that. Like there's been, when things get crazy, communications get crazy, but I don't buy incompetence where they just totally forgot to have someone securing that one building, or the route to get to the backside of that building that sloped away, so he had a covered approach. None of it makes any sense.
So take us through what would be going through your mind and your team's mind if you were in that position. Let's say you were involved in the sniper detail, and there's a video, it appears, of a Secret Service sniper noticing the shooter before he's able to engage the shooter. What is the process from when somebody sees a threat like that and what's the process from when they see the threat to when they can execute the threat and take care of that threat? How does that all go down?
Yeah, so in like a a physical sense of what you're doing. You know, you're on your site, you're making sure you have the right elevation on, you're double checking that, your ballistics, you're making sure the wind call that you made is still the wind call that's holding, dealing with a different wind call. And you're making sure your position's good to go, because that is when, all your senses are firing. That's where all the training's for, is when you see another sniper stalking into a position to try and get a shooting vantage point. So as soon as you can clearly identify there's a rifle, you take the shot. Like, now that is sniping in a context of ROEs, and for me that's overseas. So in this particular case, the ROE, like the rules of engagement for Secret Service, I don't know what they are. I've spoken to people who have told me that Secret Service has ROE that says if there's a sniper, you're allowed to shoot him, which makes perfect sense. But I mean, I'm just kind of speculating on the rules of engagement side, because I don't know if he was allowed, or if he had to wait for permission, or if he was just checking in. I don't know any of those details.
In your experience, when you've done protective detail for VIPs, how wide of a perimeter do you lock down? And what do the procedures look like in the lead up to securing an area where someone like a prime minister would be speaking?
Yeah, so mine were more on the move in different countries when they're visiting, because our unit doesn't do protection for the prime minister while he's in Canada.
Right.
But even on the move, it's thorough. If he's stopping to be in a place like that, the one building where the shooter was would be the first thing we go to. And we would have eyes locked on it, guns on it the whole time, if we didn't have somebody on it also. I mean, the water tower that was in that photo would also be an area of concern, but like you start close and you go far, and based on resources, you go as far as you can, or it makes sense, when you're planning something like that, and especially something, in one spot, it's not a big moving thing. It's not touring a city or whatever. You're out there. I don't know what their SOP is again, but it's days before. You're making sure, like, because when there's a figure that's that important, you have to make sure that, like, the buildings aren't rigged to blow up, for instance. Like, there's just so many things to think about. Now, that's more of an overseas context also, but there's security sweeps that start and have to happen. And for the most immediate threat to not be taken care of, it doesn't make any sense.
And when you look at that aerial photo, as someone who was in that business, is there anything else that you think would be catching the eye of snipers on detail? Is there any other structure in that area that you think would be more important for them than the one place where the shooter was? Because as you said, and from my own common sense tells me, that location is the only location to be watching for.
Yeah, well, it's at least the primary one. You know what I mean? Like, I did see a water tower in the back, and as a cliche sniper in the tower, you'd probably want to keep an eye on it. But the primary one is the one that's 130 yards away. Like, you can just zero your rifle at that range. You don't even have to make a complicated shot. It's just so obvious. Children who play Call of Duty would tell you that. Fortnite, they would tell you that. People that paintball would tell you that. And that area was covered in tactical professionals. Level of competency, I don't know, but still tactical professionals that have done courses and training and security. It's the most obvious place.
And based off of what you know from the shot, so it's about 130, 150 yards, if I'm not mistaken. What's the likelihood of a total amateur making that shot with a scope, if he had a scope?
Yeah, see, I don't know the optic that the shooter had on his gun. I haven't seen a picture of that yet, so that changes a lot.
Right.
Now, if you have a scope, you don't need much gun training to make a shot at 130 yards. I mean, you don't really need any. I mean, provided you know how to put the bullets in the gun. It's just, it's not a tough shot to make. But again, I haven't seen what scope is on that gun.
Right. And let's just say, if you were involved in a security detail operation overseas guarding a VIP and something like this happened, what would then happen to your unit? What would the consequences be for what appears to be a failure of epic proportions here?
Oh yeah, well, the people would be fired and it would be investigated. I mean, in the unit I used to be in,
Right.
under the current Canadian government, I don't know what would happen, but the way it should happen is people should be held accountable. But I actually think more important than that, I think this needs a big investigation. Like I don't know how all those systems work in the U.S. because I'm Canadian,
Right.
but I think Donald Trump needs to beef up his security for the next 6 months, and when he's in, do a deep dive and tear apart everyone that was involved in that because it doesn't add up.
I want to switch gears here, Dallas. Some of our audience may know the story. They might have seen your viral episode with on the Sean Ryan Show, explaining not just the record shot that you made in Iraq, but also your time in the military and your exit from the military. But for those that don't know the story, I just want to have you explain to our audience how exactly it could be that someone your age, at your skill and caliber, could be allowed to leave the military during the pandemic, and why they let you leave.
It was sort of a push out the door.
Yeah.
I, to be honest, and I talked about this with Sean, is the unit, because of the government, was starting to change in a way that I didn't like anyway. I always told myself I would only do that job as much as I love doing it because the sacrifice is it's pretty big. You're deployed or gone all the time. So it's just becoming a place. It was making me question after, it's 13 years or whatever, that I'm like, maybe it's not for me anymore. I'm not the right type of person that they're looking for anymore. And when the COVID mandates came in for the shots, I went to try and get some medical advice. No one could tell me anything. They just told me it was safe. They said, okay, have you, are there anything? Is there information on how it interacts with someone that's had a bunch of concussions, let's say, like I have, or like, whatever health issues, how does it, like, oh, we don't know, but it's safe for everyone. I was like, for everyone. And again, none of it was, I didn't have some political stance. I'm just like, well, you can't give me any information on this thing, but you're telling me I have to take it. It doesn't add up. I'm not in the demographic, according to everything that's coming out, that's really harmed by even getting COVID, which I had. So it just didn't really make sense. And then the masking as well. I wasn't going to play that game on our camp anyway, because if you're going into someone's store and it's older people, like, can you please put on a mask? Sure. But like at camp, it was just a weird virtue signal. We work in a small special operations camp. We'd be in meetings with no masks. We'd be doing jujitsu, go to the shooting range. And then if one person from the chain of command that liked masking was coming, they wanted us all to put on masks. And I was just like, I am not playing that game at all. So I got kicked out. I got kicked out of the unit and off the camp. It was the last day I'd ever gone there because I wouldn't put a mask on in a meeting. That was it.
It's an incredible story, and I when I listened to it on the Sean Ryan Show, I just was left with the thought that why would we do this to the most elite troops in our military when we have an attrition crisis, when we have a recruiting crisis, and what appears to be a serious crisis in leadership at the military level right now. I know you're out of the game in terms of the military, but what do you think, as someone who has been right to the very top of the special forces system, what do you think the military should do to be stronger at recruiting young Canadians to join the military?
Get new leaders.
That includes
the problem.
Yeah, that includes up to the government as well, you think?
Right. Absolutely. It has to start there. Right. It's with a poor leader in place. If a poor leader's in place or in charge of a really good unit for a small amount of time, you can normally be okay. When there's terrible leadership over a long enough period of time, it all trickles down. The whole it just keeps getting passed down the longer and longer you have poor leadership. And that's in military units, that's in sports teams, it's in business. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
And what about, you mentioned that your unit, JTF2, was going in a direction before you left that you didn't like. Was that due mostly to the pandemic? Or was that more so on unit leadership and inside the military?
I think it was inside the military, but directed from the government of Canada. The job in JTF2 is extremely demanding. You have to fight and shoot and do all kinds of training every single day in different terrain and in different vehicles and jumping out of planes and swimming in the water, just everything you can imagine all the time. And then you deploy for long periods of time. And the government started implementing a bunch of they're just like a course on some type of sensitivity or a course on something else. You have to go on this other computer system and take 5 hours to do this thing. And to me, none of it was relevant to my job, which is counterterrorism. So I never did any of them. And that was sort of the start of like, I started getting in a little bit of administrative trouble because I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm going to be at the shooting range, and that was just, it was a trickle down, all units will do this. And that's kind of what started me getting that feeling that it wasn't for me anymore.
Right. No, of course. And we've also seen a series of departures at a senior level in the military, whether that be for allegations that have now or since been dropped, some not the case, but it seemed as though for at least a few years, top leaders in the military were being taken out of their posts for all number of reasons. And that to me signaled that there was a serious crisis of leadership at that top brass level. You were in the military when some of those began, I believe. What was the atmosphere like when people started to be taken out of their jobs and those that apparently were very well respected inside the military, when they were pushed aside for others?
I think it's not surprising. It started at the government level, and if the government didn't like what that person was or stood for, or sadly the way they looked, then they were looking to replace them for a person that fit what they were looking for.
For sure. I want to go back to just some of the security questions regarding what it might look like for a prime minister now to go overseas in the wake of something like this. When a prime minister now goes overseas, is there going to be any change in security, or are things usually so high, or is the security level so high already that there won't be much of a change going forward? Do you anticipate there to be some big changes going forward in Canadian politics?
I don't think so. I think like this is so clearly a terrible example of security. Like no one uses the model that was used the other day. Don't cover the most threatening building and let a sniper walk up a ladder and go on it. Like it's not even, it's such a terrible plan. So no, I don't think too much is going to change. Like we have close protection pretty dialed in, and it works well.
When you did the interview with Sean Ryan, you also released, I believe it was the first time that footage of your famous shot was released, and the media fallout in Canada was quite something. Obviously, the legacy media began parroting a lot of what the federal government was writing about it. You caused quite a bit of a stir there. Did you anticipate that the government would respond the way they did when that footage of the famous shot was released?
Well, the funny part is that wasn't footage of the shot. So whoever was complaining from the military, I guess, didn't watch the video, which the military has a copy of. So I just kind of giggled because all of these news articles are coming out about it. And I'm like, that's not the video of the shot. So I don't know. The response I sort of expected because I was talking about the COVID stuff. I met with a ton of operators from our unit before I went on Sean Ryan's podcast to talk through operational security, what I was going to talk about. And just the one warning was from a higher up officer. He's like, yeah, it's all good. He's like, if you tell the COVID story, there's probably going to be backlash. I said, that's okay.
And that was what we had. That's what I, at least how I interpreted that whole series of events, that really they were more upset about what was going on behind the scenes, what was being said behind to the public about how the military responded about,
Yeah.
during COVID. And it seems like it really caused a stir, because clearly that was a major issue for a lot of members, not just yourself. How many members were let go because of the mandates?
Oh, I don't know the numbers. I just know that guys found their way out of the military, and some of them very quickly, including myself, when all this was happening. It was like the whole response to it when I went on the Sean Ryan show was just, it was absurd. They were like grasping at anything they could think. Like I actually even asked them a whole bunch of times before I left the unit. I said, is there someone, and I didn't exactly leave on good terms, but I'm like, is there someone I could talk to? And I was saying this over and over, months and months to me getting out. Someone that I could talk to, a public affairs officer, someone, because I'm going to go on podcasts. I'm going to be a musician. It's like a public space. I'm going to tell any story of my life that I want. I will protect operational security for the people that still work overseas, and like the secrets that we have with other countries. I'm obviously not telling that. But I'm like, is there someone I can talk to? Where I say, look, I'm going to post this today. Would you like something written a little differently? Do you have a concern for this? Is this good for your branding? And it was just, it was ignored over and over and over and over. And then I came out, and all they did is complain and harass me, do investigations and all this shit.
Before I let you go, Dallas, I want to give you the chance to talk about your music career, where Canadians can listen to your music, and if you have any shows coming up in Canada that Canadians can go watch.
Yeah, I've got my website, dallasalexander.ca. I've got vinyl and CD albums available for sale, and I'm putting all those songs out onto Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all of the platforms. I think there's 4 of the 8 are out right now, or 5 of the 8. And I just keep releasing music. So if you look up Dallas Alexander, I'm just always putting out music. Shows, we've got some shows coming up, playing in London, Ontario on the 20th of this month, July. And then out in Alberta for Big Valley Jamboree, a songwriter thing. We're going to do a run of shows with an artist named Brian Martin, kind of opening a bunch of places from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario.
What made you want to get into music?
Oh, I've always loved music. I actually started using songwriting more as therapy, and it was just such a, it was helping so much. And as I started learning to play guitar a little bit more, I was like, just changed my focus. I'm like, this is what I'm doing next. And all of the crazy focus I had at the unit for shooting and fighting and all the different things, it just switched to like guitar playing and singing and songwriting.
Well, I appreciate you speaking to us, telling us some of your story, some of what happened, and also getting into the details of the shooting at the Trump rally, because I think, unlike many people who have been talking about it and speculating on what really went on, you have more experience in that line of work. So, Dallas Alexander, I really appreciate you joining us on the Faulkner Show today.
Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.